In the cold, misty lands of 16th century Hungary, among castles that pierced the skies and forests that whispered old secrets, a name was born that would later strike terror across Europe. That name was Elizabeth Bathory. History would remember her as the Blood Countess, a noble woman whose beauty was matched only by her cruelty, and whose legend has twisted itself into one of the darkest tales ever told. But before the shadows consumed her, Elizabeth was born into the powerful Bathory family in 1560. The Bathorys were one of the most influential aristocratic dynasties of Eastern Europe. They owned vast lands, commanded armies, and wielded influence that even kings respected. From birth, Elizabeth was surrounded not only by privilege but also by the darker aspects of power, whispers of witchcraft, brutal feudal laws, and a culture where cruelty often walked hand in hand with nobility. Elizabeth's childhood was anything but ordinary. She suffered from epileptic seizures as a child, known then as the falling sickness. Treatments were harsh and strange, sometimes involving rubbing the blood of a non-sufferer onto the lips of the afflicted. Such practices may have shaped Elizabeth's lifelong obsession with blood, though whether this is fact or legend remains blurred. Despite her illness, Elizabeth was intelligent and striking. She spoke multiple languages, including Latin, German, and Hungarian. She was educated, rare for women of her time, and carried herself with pride and authority even at a young age. Yet beneath her refinement, shadows lingered. Rumors claim that Elizabeth as a child once witnessed acts of unimaginable cruelty carried out by her family's soldiers. Stories suggest she saw servants beaten, mutilated, or even executed for minor mistakes. To a young mind, the sight of suffering may have planted the first seeds of what would later blossom into horror. At just 11 years old, Elizabeth was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, a wealthy nobleman and warrior. The marriage was arranged to strengthen the alliance between two powerful families. Elizabeth, still a child, was moved to Nadasdy's castle, where she would grow into womanhood under the cold stone walls of a fortress that would later become infamous. Ferenc, known as the Black Knight of Hungary, was a soldier who spent most of his life at war, fighting the Ottoman Empire on the bloody battlefields of Eastern Europe. His brutality was legendary. He was said to impale his enemies, leaving their bodies as gruesome warnings. Some accounts suggest that Elizabeth learned from him, watching and perhaps even admiring his cruelty. Others claim she was left alone, for long periods managing vast estates with only servants and guards under her command. It was during these years that Elizabeth's darker tendencies began to reveal themselves. Servants whispered that their young mistress was harsh, quick to anger, and fond of punishment. Yet as the lady of the household, she had unchecked power. To disobey her was to risk suffering in silence, for who would dare question a countess? In 1575, at the age of 15, Elizabeth married Ferenc in a grand ceremony attended by nobles and royals. Thousands came to witness the union of two powerful families. As a wedding gift, Ferenc presented her with Chete Castle, also called Choctich Castle, a looming fortress atop a hill in present-day Slovakia. This castle would become her domain, and later, her prison. Elizabeth Bathory now stood as one of the most powerful women in Hungary. Her lands stretched far, her wealth was immense, and her beauty was whispered about in courts across Europe. But behind her elegance, cruelty festered. When Ferenc was away at war, Elizabeth ruled alone. Peasants came to her castle with complaints, debts, or petitions for mercy. Instead of mercy, many found cruelty. The punishments she devised were said to be creative and merciless. Slaps turned to beatings, beatings turned to torture. Legends claim she would test the loyalty of her servants by inflicting pain, watching their endurance as if it were a game. And yet, to the outside world, Elizabeth Bathory remained a respected noblewoman. She entertained guests, wrote letters, and maintained alliances. She was the perfect image of a countess. But those who lived within the castle walls began to see a different side, one that was darker, more violent, and more dangerous. As the years passed, Elizabeth gave birth to several children, ensuring the continuation of her bloodline. But her marriage was not one of affection. It was a bond forged in politics, duty, and perhaps shared cruelty. Together, Elizabeth and Ferenc became a feared couple, ruling their lands with iron fists. The true horror of Elizabeth Bathory's story, however, began after her husband's death. In 1604, Ferenc Nadasdy died from an illness, leaving Elizabeth a widow at the age of 44. With his passing, Elizabeth's power became absolute. No longer bound by the influence of her husband, she was free to act on her darkest impulses. And it is here, after Ferenc's death, that legend and history intertwine. For this is when the whispers began to spread of the countess who bathed in blood.